Hello and welcome to another edition of Cloud Testing video. In this video, we'll discover different application KPIs, key performance indicators in cloud. Different applications would perform very differently in cloud depending on instances, how the applications behave, and we'd like to see all of them, like starting with a baseline and then add different types of applications, then mix with different types of applications, and in the end we'll also play around with the topology by introducing a device in the middle like a firewall. To start off, we'll have a really simple topology of two instances deployed in the cloud, C5X large in AWS, and we'll generate traffic between them, and at the very last test we'll introduce a firewall in between. So let's get to the test itself. As you can see, I already have certain tests created in my CyPerf instance. These are the 5 tests, and I have leveraged my pre-canned configs that I have talked about in my other videos, like we have CyPerf performance configs, feature configs, cloud configs, and I have taken 1 or 2 of configs to get me a head start. My first test is a web throughput, which is basically establishing a baseline with high number of HTTP connections and each of them having a lot of data transfer to enhance the max throughput that I can reach. And this is the client, that's what I mentioned about. It would use a cloud instance and it would go to server. It's again another cloud instance in the same VPC. We'll start the test and see how it goes. Now I had the test run completed and you can see we have around 9.8, 9.75 gigs achieved over the duration. And this is kind of the max this instances can do. And you can see the latencies and other such parameters to it. So that's my established baseline, which is probably the theoretical max throughput that I can achieve. Let's quickly shift to the test number 2. So for the test number 2, I just used a different application, an Office 365 application. And since we have established the baseline, I will now set it to 10 gigs and run the test again. I ran this test and you can see in the statistics that I am achieving around 8.4, 8.5 throughput. So that's still slightly lower than the web throughput, but OneDrive is a heavy data application, so I expected the throughput to be high. Now let's go to my third test. And this time I used another unique application that is different than a data application, is Skype. That's topology, the setup, everything else remains the same because that's the only way we can do apples to apples comparison. So let's run this test. I ran this test and you can see my throughput has definitely taken a dip and I'm getting around 5.6, 5.7, we'll call it like somewhere around 5.5 gigs of throughput with just Skype. And you can also see the latencies is a little different and everything else would be slightly lower as compared to the previous tests. Now let's move on to the fourth test. My fourth test is a productivity mix throughput. So let's click on it. And this is where we are kind of mixing all these applications that we had and add some more to create some realistic application mix. Most of these, if you click on it, are realistic transactions to show what exactly happens in real life. So this is where we are moving towards finding an application mix KPI. Everything else still remains same, 10 gigs, same instances. And let's run this test. I ran this test. And you can see this test with all the application mixes hovers around 4.6, 4.7, around that level. And you can see all these applications and their mixes are being maintained. This is the cumulative latencies and we can observe some spikes here. It's a much more complicated test now. So 4.5, 4.6 is my average throughput. Now let's move to our final test. In the final test, I changed the topology slightly. So I now have a firewall in between, and how I did that is in my IP network, instead of having automatic for the gateway, I have set a specific gateway that would go to the ingress direction of the firewall from the client side. Everything else is DHCP from those interfaces, but the traffic is routed to the client of to the ingress side of the firewall. And if I go to my network 2, which is my server, I have done so that the traffic from the server is routed again to the egress direction of the firewall. So that way this is connected to the WAN link and my client is to the LAN link. And if I generate this test, it would go and generate all the traffic through the firewall. So let's run this test. So I ran this test and you can see really big dip in the traffic performance, showing the amount of impact that a firewall can have, especially when you have complex application mixed traffic, and our throughput stands around 1.2, 1.3 gigs. So a massive reduction from what we had achieved earlier. I wanted to summarize all the conclusions in a single slide. And we can see that for web throughput, it was 9.75 and gradual drop. In fact, if you compare the drop as compared to this 9.75 baseline, you can see as applications change, application mixes change, there is a significant drop in this table observed, right? And this is just for one instance. For every different instance, for different cloud, for different applications and different application mixes, there will be very, very different data points. And sometimes it has to be your instances. That's where you need to personalize what kind of applications you will be running, in what kind of instances and what kind of topologies you will be running, to find out your baselines and then create your application mixes, which Cyperf allows you to do that, so that you can also have a chart to understand the actual KPIs and performance impacts of different applications when you move there in cloud. Thanks a lot for listening.